Hi, everyone. Welcome to the College Fair of Greater Denver Virtual College Fair, the financial aid session. Thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited you are here. My name is Catherine, and I will be your facilitator for this session. Before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items to note. First, your camera and microphone are off. You are muted and your video is off. The panelists can't see or hear you. If you have any questions at all, feel free to use the Q&A button to type in your questions to the presenters at any time. They are here, ready and available to answer your questions. This is one of many college presentations being offered, so feel free to check the schedule on the website for more. And lastly, all sessions are being recorded, including this one, and will be available at strivescan.com/Greater Denver. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to our panelist, Lisa Briggs from the University of Colorado, Denver.
Good evening, everyone. Again, yes, my name is Lisa Briggs. I'm with the University of Colorado, Denver. I serve as the financial aid expert for our admissions office. And my job is to make sure everyone has all the information they need as it relates to financial aid to ensure that they have access to financial aid. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we'll go ahead and get started because I have a lot of information to share. Feel free to put any of your questions in the chat, and afterwards I will address those questions. All right, so first thing, to start the financial aid process, you will need to complete the free application for federal student aid. This is the application that is required by most colleges throughout the United States. The website to apply for the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA, changed as of April of 2021. So the new website that you would go to would be https://studentaid.gov. It's no longer FAFSA.gov. Everything that you need to do with financial aid would start at studentaid.gov. The FAFSA application, you would have to complete every October. So coming October 1st, for those students that are graduating the next spring, so if they're graduating in May or June of 2022, you would need to complete the FAFSA application as of October 1st. The FAFSA application for most of the colleges have a priority deadline date, but you don't want to wait because that's usually in April. You want to complete that application as soon as possible after October 1st to make sure that you get everything in on time so that you could be awarded most of all funding that will be available at the colleges. So to get started, this is the front page of the FAFSA application. So again, you will go to studentaid.gov. Either the student can start the process to complete the FAFSA application, or the parent can start the process. If the student starts the FAFSA application, they would have to log in with something called a FSA ID username and password, and we'll talk about that shortly. So your username and password is how the student would begin to complete the FAFSA application. However, if the parent is starting the FAFSA application, they will also need a FSA ID username and password, but they cannot start the FAFSA with their username and password. They would need the student's identifying information, so their name as it appears on their Social Security card, the Social Security number, as well as their date of birth in order to start the FAFSA on behalf of the student. So how to apply? First, and this is something that you can do now before October 1st, and I highly recommend that you go ahead and do so. You need to create the FSA ID username and password. This literally is the hardest part of the financial aid process because there's a lot of background checks and security checks that go into securing that you are the person that's requesting this information. The FSA ID username and password serves as your electronic signature, okay? And this is what you would need in order to sign the FAFSA application to submit it to the federal processor. If a student does not have a valid Social Security number, then they cannot create an FSA ID username or password. Same for the parent. If they don't have a valid Social Security number, they cannot create a username and password to electronically sign the FAFSA. What you would do for the parent information is when you get to their Social Security number on the FAFSA application, you will put in all zeros, complete the application. Before you submit it, you would want to print the signature page. The parent would then have to sign it and mail it into the federal processor, and you want to mail it in as soon as possible. If they don't receive that signature page before the 10-day business date has passed, then they will delete the application because they're thinking maybe you're no longer interested in applying, okay? But the student has a valid Social Security number, they should complete the FAFSA and mail in the signature page for the parent if there's no valid Social Security number for the parent, okay? And the address of where it needs to be sent will be on that signature page. And mainly the only difference between submitting it electronically versus having to submit the paper signature page is timing. If you use the FSA ID username and password, it only takes about 3 to 5 business days to process and send your FAFSA application to the colleges of your choice. If you have to mail in the signature page, it can take anywhere between 4 and 6 weeks for that to process before your colleges will receive it. In order to create the FSA ID username and password, the student and at least one parent will need to complete and create a username and password. So the student and at least one of your parents will have to have a valid Social Security number, a cell phone that is valid and active where you can receive an immediate text because they will send a code for you to put on the FAFSA to your text messages. And then also make sure you have the student and the parent have their own email account. Do not use your high school email address because you will not always have access to that email account once you graduate, okay? So when you start to complete the FAFSA application, it's going to ask for income and tax information from the student, if the student worked, and also for the parent. So for financial aid purposes, all students are dependent on their parents up until the age of 24. So income information will be required on the FAFSA from the parent as well. In the case of divorce, then the parent that is providing 51% of the support for the student should be the one who is completing the FAFSA on behalf of the student, okay? If there are divorces, that one parent that is providing the support, regardless of who the student lives with, they should be the one that's completing the FAFSA. It doesn't matter who has claimed the student on their taxes either. It does not matter for financial aid purposes, okay? So something that's in effect with the FAFSA and the tax income information is something called prior year or PPY. And it used to be maybe 3 or 4 years ago, the tax information that you would be providing on the FAFSA would be the tax return that students and parents will be starting to complete in January of 2022. But because a lot of parents weren't filing their taxes prior to the April 15th date, students were missing out on scholarship and grant opportunities because some of those donors wanted you to submit that application and a copy of the results from your FAFSA report in January and February. But if you hadn't done the taxes yet, then you weren't able to do that, and therefore you weren't able to apply for that scholarship. So the PPY program has moved that barrier. So now you would provide the tax return from 2 years prior to your fall start. So if you're starting college in fall of 2022, 2 years prior is 2020. So the tax information that would go on the FAFSA for the 2022-23 year would be the 2020 taxes. Those should already be done, so there should be no delay in anyone starting their FAFSA application on October 1st. Okay. Another thing to add to that especially during this world of COVID and the pandemic, a lot of people have maybe lost their jobs, have decreased income, could have been death of a parent. Then there will be something called a special circumstances or a professional judgment appeal that a student can submit. But you have to complete the FAFSA initially with the 2020 information, receive your award notice from the college. You can add up to 10 different colleges on the FAFSA application to receive your information. So it'll be important to narrow down your choices of what college you would want to go to, because you would have to submit an appeal to each one of those colleges until you know exactly where you want to go. But you can submit something called professional judgment. This allows the financial aid office to go in and make the adjustments on your FAFSA application if there's been a loss of income, if there's been a death, if there's been, maybe a new baby to your household that was different than what was reported on your 2020 information. And they will go in and adjust your information to real time as to what it is for your current circumstances. Because we realize that how the tax information and income looked in 2020 may not be the same in 2022. But the important thing is that when you first start the FAFSA application, you have to complete it with the information that's being requested. And that would be the 2020 taxes. Get your award notice from the school. If your aid is not sufficient or for what you need to pay for your cost of tuition and fees, books, and your living expenses, then that's when you would submit an appeal to the financial aid office. After you submit the FAFSA application, all communication is with the financial aid offices at the colleges of your choice. Okay. Some of the different components could also be that maybe the student is not living with their parents, or both parents are deceased, or they're in foster care or have a legal guardianship. So the only parents that can complete the FAFSA application on the behalf of the student would be the student's biological parent, or if the student was adopted. Only those circumstances would an additional adult put their information on the student's FAFSA. If neither one of those are the case, so maybe the student was raised by a grandparent or aunt, they were not legally adopted, meaning maybe they were in a legal guardianship or they were just staying with someone else away from their parents, then that student would want to appeal to the financial aid office as an independent student, meaning that no parent information will be required on the FAFSA, but you will have to document what the circumstances are in a personal statement to the financial aid office. So in the case of death of the parents, you just write a statement, parents are deceased, and submit a copy of death certificates to confirm that. And then the financial aid office will not require parental information. Yeah, but there's only certain circumstances that they would be able to do that, okay? So, and these are the circumstances where a student will be considered an independent student. So if you were born before January 1st of 1999, the student is married at the time that they submit the FAFSA, if the student is in the military, if the student have children, their own children that they are supporting, not that their parents are supporting or helping them with. If the student is providing more than half of the support for their own child, then they could be considered an independent student and parent information will not be required on the FAFSA. If the student was orphaned in foster care, ward of the court, meaning that they were removed from the home for their own protection, then they could be considered an independent student. If the student is an emancipated minor and a legal guardianship, if the student is unaccompanied from their parents, they live away from their parents, or they live at a friend's house, they're sleeping on the couch, sleeping in their car, their bridge, whatever, then they could be considered an independent student and parent information will not be required. And there may be a few other circumstances. So in doubt, always reach out to the financial aid office at any college and they can assist you with determining which type of appeal you should apply for. But we just want to make sure that every student has access to get funding to go to school. Okay. So once you start completing the FAFSA application, it will require the tax information. There's a process through the FAFSA application called verification, which the federal government charges every financial aid office to verify that the information on the FAFSA that was submitted by the student and parent is accurate. And if that's the case, they may ask for a copy of your federal 1040 or other financial documents, verification of household size, other children that you have in college. One way to alleviate having to submit tax returns to the financial aid office is using this tool, the data retrieval tool or the DRT tool. In the FAFSA, it will ask you if you would like to access the Internal Revenue Service website through the data retrieval tool. You want to say yes or highly recommend. This will minimize the errors of you having to go in and manually input the information from your tax returns. And it could alleviate you being selected for verification as well. You will need the FSA ID, username and password, the student, and if the student worked, and also the parent, if they worked and filed a tax return, can utilize the data retrieval tool. But you will have to have your username and password to log into the data retrieval system and a copy of your 2020 taxes in front of you, because once you log into it, there's going to be a pre-filled screen of information that they'll need in order to find your tax return in the IRS system and add it to the FAFSA on your behalf. So, but the information on the tax return must match exactly in the pop-up box for the data retrieval tool that will populate for you to submit it to the data retrieval tool in the IRS. So for example, if your name is Michael James Smith and on the tax return it says Michael J. Smith, but on the data retrieval tool it pops up as Michael James Smith spelled out the middle name, or it has no middle initial. That pop-up box must match exactly what's on the tax return, or it will not be able to find your tax return to link it to your FAFSA application. Okay, don't put commas, darts, periods, anything like that. It won't recognize any of that, and it will reject. And then also make sure the address is exactly the same. So if your address is 123 South Elm Street, on the tax return, South is spelled out, but on the data retrieval tool, you just put an S for South. It's not going to match. It needs to match exactly the way it is on that tax return in order to find your tax information to move it forward. Okay. If you're not able to use the data retrieval tool, then you would just have to manually input the information from your tax return. And the FAFSA will spell that out very clearly. It will say, take line 7 from Schedule 1 or 2 and put it on line 5 of your FAFSA application. Just follow the instructions and you'll get through it just fine. If it says line 7, Schedule 2, and then you're looking and you don't see a Schedule 2 in your tax return, don't worry about it. That means you probably don't have a Schedule 2 if it's not with your tax document. So don't delay the process. Just go ahead and work with what you have in your file and submit it through your FAFSA information. Okay. Once that information is transmitted, if you use the data retrieval tool, you will not see the information that's been transmitted, but it will say that the information in the various questions that you will continue to go through, it will say that that information was transferred by the IRS. The only people that will be able to see that information that has transferred to your FAFSA application will be the financial aid offices of the schools that you've chosen. They cannot share that information with anyone that's been received. If it's coming from your tax return, if you file, then you should know what that information is. But they do not have federal guidance on releasing any of that information to the parent or the students. So this is the type of aid that could be, a student could be eligible for applying for the FAFSA application. So through federal type aid is the Pell Grant, which goes, and the SEOG grant goes to the neediest of students. And that's based on the expected family contribution that is determined by the information that's provided on the FAFSA. And that is what the financial aid offices will use to determine how needy a student is. So the expected family contribution, or the EFC, and we'll talk a little more about that shortly. Then there's the Teach Grant for students, maybe they're going into the teaching field, but you need to make sure that you're planning to be a teacher because there's stipulations to that grant. It could be about $4,000 a year. But if you don't go into the teaching field as indicated on the forms, if you take that grant, it will turn into an unsubsidized student loan, meaning interest is accruing, and that interest will go back to when you initially received that grant. So you want to be very certain that you're going into the teaching field if you accept that grant. Then there's the Iraq and Afghanistan and Children of Fallen Heroes. So those who served in the war after 9/11, and then whose parents have died in the line of duty to be eligible for an additional grant funding, which is usually the same amount of the Pell Grant. The Pell Grant per year currently is $64.95, $6,495. There is talk about in the future about tripling, not tripling, but doubling that amount to a little over 12,000. So let's keep our fingers crossed. Also, the financial aid offices will use the results of the FAFSA, which is called the Student Aid Report, or the SAR, to indicate what type of state funding that they could offer or other grants and scholarships that they can offer through the colleges. You also want to make sure that you're applying for scholarships from various resources. The colleges will have scholarships, but they don't have enough to go around to everyone. So everyone should be doing scholarship searches through private resources, in churches, your parents' employer, your employer, social organizations, anywhere you go. Ask them if they have scholarships, because sometimes they just go unasked for and unused. So it's a very tedious process. Start early. Make sure you note the deadline dates, what's required, get your letter of recommendations, your essays together, and they can assist you. So scholarships could be based on merit, your grades, or based on need, could be based on your talents. Yeah, there's weird scholarships out there. If you got red hair and green eyes, there's a scholarship. So just do a search. For CU Denver, if you're interested, our scholarship application opens on October 1st. You can go in and submit an application. It will collect enough information for you to go through our database to find all the scholarships that you potentially will be eligible for, and it will provide you with a list of those. And then if there's anything additional needed, it will give you an instruction, but it will provide you with a list. Okay. Also, FAFSA helps determine whether a student could be awarded work study. Work study is basically a job on campus. You have to be need-based in most cases. Some schools do have non-need-based work study funding, but it's very limited. On the FAFSA application, it's going to ask you if you're interested in applying in work study position. Always say yes, even if you're not sure. Therefore, it will be awarded initially. If you don't ask for it up front in the FAFSA process, and then you go to the financial aid office after the fact, you may be put on a waiting list because they overspend that money prior to students starting school, because we don't know who's going to work and who's not. Okay? So always ask for it. Work study money is not there to pay your tuition. It's there to assist you with your living expenses while you're in school. Usually tuition is due prior to the first day of classes or shortly thereafter, unless you sign up for a payment plan with the business office at the college where you can make monthly payments. Okay. Other type of aid that you have to complete the FAFSA to be considered for is the direct student loan, which is a loan that the student can take out, and the Parent Plus loan that a parent can take out on behalf of the student to help with their cost of attendance. So subsidized loan and unsubsidized. Those loans come in two different components, subsidized and unsubsidized. The difference between the two is that one is need-based. No interest is accruing on it. The government's paying the interest on the subsidized portion while the student's in school. If the student is awarded the unsubsidized, interest starts accruing on the amount of that loan that's been dispersed. Okay? Payment can be deferred while the student is in school. The student does not go into repayment on these loans until 6 months after they graduate or cease to be enrolled at least half-time. You have to be enrolled at least half-time, typically 6 credit hours, to be eligible for a federal student loan. The Parent Plus loan, in order for the parents to be considered for it, the student does have to have a valid FAFSA on file. The parents will have to complete the Parent Plus loan. It is based on credit history for the parent, not the student. And the payments can be deferred while the student is in school, and payment won't begin until the student graduates or ceases to be enrolled at least half-time. But that repayment won't go into effect until 6 months after the student graduates. Okay? If it is denied, then the student can get an additional $4,000 in the unsubsidized staffing. The cap for freshmen for the direct student loan is $5,500. That amount increases by $1,000 each grade level. So once the student goes from a freshman to a sophomore, then they'll get an additional amount on that direct student loan. Okay. So in order to be eligible for federal student aid, then the student has to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, have a high school diploma or GED, have a valid social security number or permanent resident number, must be meeting satisfactory academic progress, meaning that after your first semester, there's 3 components that you have to meet in order to continue to be eligible to receive federal student aid. You have to be maintaining at least a 2.0 GPA every semester. You have to be passing anywhere between 67% and 75% of your courses each semester. That percentage depends on the college. And then you have to be progressing towards graduating within 150% time frame of your program. Basically meaning you have about 6 years to complete your program and continue to receive financial aid. Okay. You must also be enrolled and accepted in an eligible program, meaning you're working towards completing a degree. You're not just taking classes. Then also, there was a component that just went away in July that all males have to register for selective service. That question may be on the application, but males are now no longer required to register for selective service. That component has been taken away. And then also there was a component that if you had been convicted of a drug-related offense, that your financial aid would be suspended. That has also been removed as a requirement for financial aid. Okay, so that's why I have those highlighted because they're no longer an issue. Cost of attendance or the budget will be determined by each college. So your budget will be very different from every school. And a cost of attendance or a budget consists of tuition and fees, books and supplies, the room and board, transportation, and a personal allowance. So it's just an estimated amount. They don't know what every student's expenses will be, but the main budget, biggest component is the tuition and fees and the books and supplies. So that can vary from student to student. It can also vary if the student is going full-time versus half-time. So if the cost of attendance is determined to be $20,000 for a fall and spring year, as for a full-time student, if you're only going half-time, it's only going to be $10,000. Cost of attendance, you cannot receive more aid than your cost of attendance for your budget that's determined by the college. Okay, so when you receive your award notice, it will not be more than the cost of attendance. How the amount of the Parent Plus loan that the parent can borrow, there's really no cap. But again, in all aid sources, you cannot receive more aid than the cost of attendance that's determined by the school. So if the cost of attendance is $20,000 and the student got $10,000 in grant scholarships, work study, all of that, then that means there's only $10,000 left over that the parent can apply for in the Parent Plus loan. So the cost of attendance minus the EFC, the expected family contribution, which is what the federal government considers families to be able to contribute towards their child's education. It's not always a realistic number, and that's primarily why the loans are in fact to help offset that. But the EFC, or the expected family contribution, is what the financial aid office will use to determine how needy a student is and the type of aid that they can award out to a student. If you have no need at all, you're still eligible for financial aid. It may just be the work study and the student loans for the student and the parent. It could also be some institutional funding as well. So it's good to always complete the FAFSA application because most scholarship donors will request a copy of the results from the FAFSA. The results of the FAFSA is called the Student Aid Report. Okay, again, 3 to 5 business days after you submit it. If you submit it electronically, 4 to 6 weeks. If you submit it by signature page. Okay, and this is what the financial aid offices will use. So after 3 to 5 business days, start checking your email. All email communications from FAFSA will go directly to the students. So parents, you need to be asking your students to check their email because they will be receiving a lot of information from the colleges after that FAFSA application has been submitted. Okay, you do not have to be accepted at a college in order to submit your FAFSA to go to them. They will receive it. Once they have your admissions information, you've been accepted, then they will be able to pull in your FAFSA data. But go ahead and include them on the FAFSA to receive it. If you're not sure, you don't know if you're in or whatever, it's okay. You can add up to 10 different schools to receive that information. Monitor your email. Once you get accepted and start receiving information from the schools, they will assign a college email, so you need to check that also. Check at least once a week. until everything is processed. So all the way through your fall semester in college. You want to make sure you're checking that, because any updates, most of the colleges will only communicate to you through that email account or through the student portal that you will log into at the college. This is a sample of the student aid report, the front page. Up in this square here is a sample of the EFC. And so that's what the number would be. The best number to have is 0. That means you're the neediest of the students. And that number can go up to about 5,700. And you will be considered for some need-based type aid. So this number is over 5,700. So this student, it will indicate here that the student is not eligible for the Pell Grant. There's a little asterisk by that EFC. That means the student has been selected for verification. And the financial aid office will be asking for additional information. Make sure you're reading this page. This report is about 10 pages long. Print it out. Make sure you're reading it, making sure everything is correct, because this is what they're using to determine how much aid you can receive. Okay. So that's all I have as far as the FAFSA presentation is concerned. I'm going to go ahead and this is some information about some helpful YouTube videos that are done about additional information and things that's going on. If you would like a copy of this presentation, you can email me, and I'll put my email up right now. And you can send me an email if you want a copy of the presentation. I'll be happy to forward it to you. So this is my contact information. You can give me a call. We can schedule a Zoom if you're having problems when you're completing the FAFSA. I'll be happy to assist you with that as well. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing and look at the questions. Okay, so first question. Is that the first one? Yeah, okay. So both student and the parent will complete the FAFSA application if the student is under the age of 24. A student and at least one parent have to complete the FAFSA application. The student and at least one parent must create an FSA ID username and password, which serves as your electronic signature to submit the FAFSA and also to retrieve the data, the tax information as well. And again, in the case of divorce, then the parent that's providing at least 51% of the support for the student should be the one that's completing the FAFSA with the student. Okay. I was laid off. Okay. Okay, so in the case of where there's a change in income from 2020 to 2022, you must complete the FAFSA information with your tax income information from 2020. Okay, if your circumstances is different in 2022, after you have submitted the FAFSA, the student has received the award notification, and not sufficient aid was provided, then you would want to appeal to the financial aid office yes, Catherine. You would want to appeal to the financial aid office that there's been a change in your circumstances. And they can choose not to include the unemployment income. Actually, I think there's a new rule that just came out. There's a lot of changes going on with the financial aid process as a result of COVID. And I want to say that the financial aid office has the option to not take in, they can remove the unemployment income, they can remove severance pay, depending on what the circumstances are. So just appeal to the financial aid office, but you do have to use the 2020 information. Okay? You cannot apply as a junior. You can only apply in your senior year.
Awesome. So, oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say that because each year you have to apply for financial aid. The FAFSA is going to change every year. So you can only apply for FAFSA, financial aid information, as a graduating high school student. Okay.
So it seems a couple questions have come up about they've just created an account. What happens now? So if you could.
Well, after you created your account, I'm assuming you're meaning FSA ID, username, and password. Great. Make sure you create one for the student and at least one parent. You cannot complete the FAFSA application until October 1st. It will not be available. There's one out there now, but it's for the 2021-22 school year, the students that are in college right now. They just started in fall. But you cannot complete that one as a senior graduating this year. You have to wait until October 1st and complete the 2022-23 FAFSA application.
Awesome. Yes. And that was a great question that was posed of when it was the financial aid application was going to open, and you covered that. So thank you. Do you mind? Let's see.
I do see one about being a part-time student.
Yep.
Yes. So you can apply for financial aid if you're a part-time student. You have to be enrolled at least half-time, which is usually 6 credit hours or 2 classes. It averages out to be about 2 classes. But yes, as long as you're half-time, 3/4 time, or full-time, you can apply for financial aid.
Awesome. So the next question is, the family doesn't need to know where the applicant is going to school. Is that correct?
No, you can add up to 10 different schools while you're researching, trying to figure out where you're going and visiting schools. Those schools will receive your information. So if you do decide to go there, then they can go ahead, they'll have your information already and they can start the financial aid process. Typically, the colleges don't even know that you're even interested in them until they've received the admissions application. The financial aid office and the admissions office are not talking to each other. Your FAFSA information cannot be shared with any other office on campus. So what alerts the financial aid office is your social security number that's tied to that FAFSA. Then they know that you're interested in applying.
Great, thank you. Another question here is, how can we update the data that we have submitted to FAFSA?
Okay, so once you created an account and submitted the FAFSA, you're no longer a new user. Now you're a return user. So you can go in as a return user at any time and update your information. So be very careful about what you're updating. You may want to contact the financial aid office and let them know what you want to do to just confirm that that's something that you should do. Because each time you go in and touch it, it creates a transaction. And the federal government is looking at how many times a FAFSA is being touched because they want to make sure that people aren't trying to commit fraud. Okay. So in each time you go in and make an update or a correction, or if you want to go in and add another college that you didn't add before, you need to make sure that you're signing and submitted it from the student and the parent with the FSA ID username and password. Both have to sign it again. So each time you make a correction and submit it, make sure you're signing it.
Awesome. Whenever you get a chance, if you don't mind sharing the slide with your contact information, I think some attendees are still trying to gather your contact information. So whenever you get a chance, that would be great.
Okay. Do that. Okay.
So another question is, do any of the various financial aid tools prohibit usage of any other financial aid?
I'm not sure I understand that question. Do any of the financial aid tools prohibit use of it any other kind? I would say no. If you're applying for other scholarships, there's another. Yeah, I would say no. Nothing's going to prohibit that at all.
Awesome. So well, I think you answered this. When do you apply? I think, yeah, we answered that one.
You can only apply for financial aid if you're a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. If you have a valid social security number or permanent resident. If you don't have that, as of yet, you cannot apply for the FAFSA application. As soon as you receive it, you can go out there and complete it. But you cannot before you have that a valid citizenship status. Okay.
There was a question in the case of blended families, whose financial information must be included in the FAFSA application.
Okay, so the student and the parent, if the parent divorced and they're the one that's providing the 51% of the support for the student, then their information goes on the FAFSA. If that parent remarries, then step-parent information has to go on the FAFSA also, because you're all part of the same household. So all household income information for the student and both parents, if remarried, have to be on the FAFSA application. And that's in the case of blended families, okay? So biological parent, step parents, you can add stepchildren if they're part of your household as part of the count of household size as well. But you could have other kids that's in college as well. So you want to make sure you include them. Anyone that's considered a dependent in your household, you can include in the household on the FAFSA.
Awesome. And can you clarify that the FAFSA does open on October 1st, correct? Does not close on. Correct.
It opens on October 1st for the 2022-23 school year. Be careful, the 2021-22 will still be out there and active, but if you complete that one, it's the wrong form and you'll have to do it all over again with the 22-23 FAFSA application.
Awesome. And if any attendees would like access to this presentation or just have questions, they can contact you directly.
Correct.
Are there any other items needed to fill out the FAFSA, or does it just need to, is just your tax return needed?
Make sure you have your social security card numbers, your driver's license number, tax documents. Let's see, that's primarily it. And just make sure that social security numbers that you're using it for the right child. We have some parents will put in the wrong social security number for a different child, or interchange the parent social security numbers and transpose the numbers, and it'll reject the FAFSA. So just make sure you're being very careful and take your time completing the FAFSA application. It's really not as scary as it seems. If you just answer the questions and do exactly what it says, you'll be fine.
And another question here is probably another point of clarification, but do attendees apply each October 1st through the college or through
FAFSA? Every time you apply for FAFSA, it's through FAFSA, and that's why they need your valid email address on account, because every time when it gets close to that, they will send you notices saying, hey, it's getting close to complete the FAFSA, and they will send the link after you've initially submitted it. They have your information, so then they will provide that information and let you know when it's time to apply. And the colleges will say, hey, it's time to, you'll start to receive something from the financial aid offices also asking you to reapply. One question I do want to address is the independent of the parent situation. So for federal student aid purposes, again, all students up until the age of 24 is dependent on their parents, regardless of whether parent is going to provide any support whatsoever. You live away from them, you're paying your own rent, your own car note, everything. For federal student aid purposes only. We don't care if they claim you on the tax returns. It doesn't matter for federal student aid purposes. But that age requirement, they do have to provide their information on the FAFSA. They don't have to do anything else, provide any other support, but we need their information on that FAFSA in order to be able to award a student.
Thank you. Can you complete the ID in junior year, or should we wait until the summer, which I believe is the FAFSA application?
Oh, the FSA ID.
In junior year, or should they wait until the summertime?
No, do it now. Do it now so you have it ready by October 1st and there won't be any delays. You should go ahead and get that started now. And then on October 1st, you just hop in. You can complete the FAFSA probably in 15, 20 minutes. It's really not that tedious.
Another question, is there anything different in the process for applying for financial aid for community college?
Nope, it's the same for all colleges. It's just aid will be different at each school because every school's cost is different. But the same EFC, the expected family contribution, will be used for every college. The FAFSA application process is the same for every college. You can even add community colleges as one of those schools on the 10 schools that you can add on the FAFSA.
Awesome. We do have about a minute or two left, so we'll do as many questions as we can get to in that time frame. But there is a question about NCAA application. Do they notify you? And also, do you, is it best to complete a financial aid application? Should they?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the NCAA, but nothing should prevent you from completing a FAFSA application. Every student across the United States should submit a FAFSA application, regardless of whatever else they're applying for. Okay. Let me read this one. So as a parent, we have student loans for 10 plus years. Do we complete the FAFSA again? So parents are not completing the FAFSA application. So the FAFSA ID username that you may have, if it's been 10 years ago, you're gonna have to create another one because the FAFSA ID just came active a few years ago. So you would want to create one. If you have more than one kid in school, or if you're in school and getting financial aid yourself, you only need one for yourself. You do not have to create an FAFSA ID for each kid or a different one for yourself. So parents only need one. That FAFSA ID is good for 10 years. Your password will change every year when you redo the FAFSA. Renew it every year, but that username will stay the same for 10 years. So don't delay. October 1st, be ready. Have your tax return information in front of you. Already have created your FAFSA ID. So on October 1st, you can get ready to complete the 2022-23 FAFSA application.
Great. Thank you so much. This was really informative. Thank you so much, Lisa Briggs from the University of Colorado, Denver, for being here. So much great information, a lot of great questions coming in through the Q&A. And so we appreciate all those questions. Again, we appreciate your time. And thank you to each of you for joining us. We have now reached the conclusion of this session. As we close, there'll be a very quick 5-question survey that will appear on your browser. If you don't mind taking a moment to fill that out for us, we really appreciate your feedback. This is one of many college presentations, so feel free to check the website for the entire schedule. And lastly, this session is being recorded, including many others, and will be available at strivescan.com/greater Denver. Again, thank you all and have a great night.